Good morning. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the AI Files podcast, your ultimate destination for staying updated on all things artificial intelligence. You can find us in Apple Podcasts as well as YouTube. I'm Shadab Hussain, your co host of the show. I'm a director of data and AI at Microsoft with over 22 years of experience solely in the analytics and AI.
And I'm Jamie Basilko, co host of the AI Files. As a data and AI technical specialist and architect, I have over 35 years of experience in data related and AI domains, having worked with many Fortune 500 companies throughout my career. Please note this is not an official Microsoft channel. The views and opinions expressed by the co hosts are their own and do not represent the views of Microsoft. So, with that, let's dive into today's episode. I know that there's a lot that we've got to cover today, Shadab. Lots of things hitting the news. So do you want to start us off, maybe?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, there's just so many things. It's quite overwhelming, and you can empathize with every listener out there or every enthusiast who wants to learn more about AI. It's just so hard to keep up, and that's why the podcast is for, right? So let me start with this. I think one of the surprising news that was there, I think, a couple of weeks ago, was that the OpenAI is actually selling more of its AI models than Microsoft is. So let me explain. So the OpenAI has the consumer app ChatGPT. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about their own enterprise services, the APIs that they actually sell, which is used by the enterprises directly. And then, of course, Microsoft sells the Azure OpenAI, which is the OpenAI flavor. Now, we all expected that the Azure OpenAI will be actually doing much more business than the OpenAI directly, which is like more consumer focused. But surprisingly, it it turned out that the OpenAI hit the $1 billion annualized revenue in those enterprise APIs before even Microsoft did. That was a little bit surprising because generally the enterprises actually like to go with the enterprise services like cloud providers like Azure, and they get bundle of the services, they get discounts, they get tons of you don't just build an application using the Azure OpenAI, you need tons of other things as well, the apps component, the infra component, the storage, the lakes, and all those. So it was a bit surprising that way. But then if you look at the other way, is it is, I think, also because there are a lot of enterprises who do not use the Azure, and for them to, rather than having to make a complete migration over to Azure, it is easier to actually just use the OpenAI services directly. And I think that's what is driving this thing. So, in all, if you see, since Microsoft actually is a prime investor in the OpenAI, it's a win win for Microsoft either way. You either come directly or you come through the OpenAI.
I was
It
going to ask.
also,
I was going to say, do you think some of that too might be because OpenAI was out first? Like, obviously, I know the Microsoft um, partnership and collaboration wasn't necessarily first and start. So, is it also maybe a perspective on timing and who was there first? Does it
I
all?
think, I think that's a good point, Jimmy. Initially, OpenAI was also releasing their services first, right? So not just that they went to the market first, but there was also a lag between OpenAI and Microsoft. However, earlier this year, Microsoft started actually following the fast follow approach, and now the services that are in OpenAI are available same day also in the Azure OpenAI. Now, of course, there's you know there is some limitations on that first day in Azure, just because Azure has to build the guardrails, make sure everything is as per the SLA. Azure has much more stringent SLAs and commitments to the customer, so they have to just make sure that everything is safe, secure, scalable. Sometimes, like, some customers may want to have everything on day one, so sometimes that drive that preference. And yes, I mean, there are many customers that we know who actually had started using OpenAI long before it was even available in Azure. So yes, that, I think, the first to market did drive some change actually as well. Although I know that several of those customers have also then since then moved into the Azure to take advantage of the wider ecosystem. But it is, I think, I think the important, not many details are available, but I think the important point is that it seems that there is a ton of the business going towards the OpenAI and the Azure OpenAI route, in a way that Microsoft itself has actually reported there are several new customers who never used that before, the Azure, and now they're actually using the Azure OpenAI, and since then has actually started using the Azure. It's a significant amount of the customers who have done that. Now, with this news, it also highlights that there are still many enterprises who were not using Azure, and they still probably want to avoid it. It's just too much of a hassle for them to move everything from the other cloud provider. So they're taking a route of going directly to the Azure, to the OpenAI. Um, it's, as I say, it's a win-win for Microsoft in
Yeah,
any way,
yeah,
right? So, um, but yeah, it's a bit surprising news.
yeah. No, certainly, indeed. So you wouldn't think about it when especially as we work here at Microsoft, but it makes sense for the things you just kind of went through.
That is true.
So
And the OpenAI always continue to dominate the AI world. Really, the other news, Jimmy, is also the OpenAI and Broadcom partnership. Now, think about it, right? I mean, it's such a complex ecosystem. You need the chips, you need the computing, and Sam Altman keep repeating that the currency of the future is the computing. So computing is so important. Making sure that you have enough capacity and bandwidth to actually provide the service is so important. In fact, there are some VC firms, etc. What they're doing is they're actually buying advanced capacity, right? Buying advanced capacity and trying to lure the AI startups and come to them so that they can invest in them, and in turn, they will also actually make those capacity available. The capacity is really at the crunch. Microsoft and other Azure, other providers are continuing to build their data center. They continue to secure the chips and the capacity. They are also investing in their own as well. And in one of the news that OpenAI and Broadcom could be a potential partnership as well, right? So Nvidia is of course dominating everything, but then people are looking actually at the alternative as well. And Broadcom is stepping up the game. If you see the Broadcom Snapdragon, what they've done, I think it's amazing. That new reviews have come out. The Snapdragon, what Broadcom has developed, and which is being used by the Copilot Plus PC, particularly in the Surface, it's amazing. So there is always new equations and the partnerships emerging and will continue to emerge.
yeah,
What also generally gets hidden is not just the capacity, it also is about the energy. You have heard about that fusion based new energy reactors, and new energy sources are being, there is so much, right? The water, the energy, there's so many other things which are hidden, are also so important in this capacity game.
yeah. I mean, you touched upon a very big topic, and an important topic at that, around just the compute power. And as you said, it's been Nvidia, and it's been Nvidia over the last seems like last couple of years as it relates to these artificial intelligence based chips. And to me, at least, the more players that are involved in creation of these next generation chips are only going to have benefit across the board. Stimulates additional innovation. You have other companies that can get their hands on these chips. So as you mentioned, I know Microsoft is making chips. You've got other hardware vendors other than just Broadcom involved in the next generation chip making. So I think it's good overall.
That's true. That's true. Um,
I was going to say,
so
speaking of competing and having chip vendors compete for uh, you know um, who's winning in the market, it kind of reminds me of the Olympics. So depending on when you're listening to this this episode, later on this week, we actually have the start of the Olympics over in Paris. So what's interesting from that is we're starting to see where AI is now being infused into things like sports. I mean, it's always been there in terms of like calculation analysis and things like football. But with the Olympics, what has come out in the last couple of weeks is that NBC plans to use an AI generated voice of Al Michaels. So if anyone's watched sports for a long time, Al Michaels is sort of a well known voice. He does a lot of the football coverage. So they're going to use his voice to narrate daily streams that are coming out of the Olympics in terms of recaps. I heard some crazy number like per day, if Al Michaels literally had to get in front of a microphone, it would be something like 7,000 hours of content. So what they're looking to do, and receive that is to use a AI generated voice of Al Michaels, and every night they'll actually have that AI voice create these daily recaps that would then go out to individuals like me or you that would want a recap. And you can get a recap of like all of the Olympics or maybe your favorite sport or several different sports. So tailored to the user, but all AI generated. And what's really interesting on this, and I think it goes back to like the human nature of the way people think. Al Michaels was very hesitant at first, like, hey, my voice, how is this actually going to sound? But there's been some quotes from Al Michael saying, this was a great experience to be able to work with these tools, and it was just astonished by the output or the accuracy of his voice. And I think I heard some stats; it was like 98% accurate in terms of his tone and inflection. So this will be a really interesting test to see, number one, how this comes out, and two, how general public, you and I, perceive use of this type of technology.
Yeah, I think AI is, as you said, right, it's all pervasive, and particularly in the sports, they are actually accepting it big time. It reminds me, just recently we had the Wimbledon, right? So Wimbledon is the classic, and like the majors of the tennis. Um, and most of the other majors, like the US Open, the French Open, and the Australian Open, these are like the four, and including Wimbledon, are the four majors, also referred as Grand Slam. So they already shifted to using the AI and making the line calls. So they actually remove the the people who are like linemen or linewomen who actually make the line calls. They've removed them. Everything is automated. The calls are made directly. Now that also actually makes it much faster, because a lot of time the players were given the challenges, the number of challenges, like they had like 3 or 4 challenges per set, and they could actually challenge that call because it is made by a human. And then the AI will actually step in and show where the ball was. They took some years to perfect it, and it became so well that now there is no need for challenge because the call is directly being made by AI. Now, Wimbledon, however, has not done that. They have not just pivoted to the AI yet. And this year, you could see the difference, right? I mean, the other French Open just concluded a month ago. It was much. French Open actually doesn't use it because they play on clay, but the Australian Open, it was much smooth. On the Wimbledon side, there were like number of frivolous challenges made by the players. It is very clear that the ball is out, but they would, since they had the challenge, they would use it. It was like a misuse. And in other cases, the linemen, they kept making the wrong calls, and then the point had to be played again. So it was just, it's so much better to do. There are many, like AI has so much value in the sports and many of the other things, that it just makes so much sense. And sometimes this nostalgia of this voice that you're talking about, people have their own favorite. So I think looking forward to all this experience during the Olympics as well.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, it's these yeah things that are actually occurring and happening and moving at a very fast pace in the way that we think and use AI. Speaking of fast pace and things changing with AI, you mentioned before the relationship and partnership that Microsoft has with OpenAI, and go back, I guess what was it, last November timeframe of this, the whole board shuffling at OpenAI, and we won't rehash that, but there were some changes out of that board shuffle and where Sam landed. So Microsoft got a seat, an observer seat on the OpenAI board. Fast forward, I think everyone knows, we talked about some new relationships between Apple and OpenAI. OpenAI being used, at least their model, for AI usage inside of iOS and the way that it's being used, or Apple AI. With that deal, Apple also got a observer role on the OpenAI board. Well, what's happened actually in the last couple of weeks is there's been a little bit more scrutiny from different regulatory bodies, most notably being the EU regulators, closely monitoring these different partnerships. Um, Obviously, the focus here is any potential antitrust scenarios that might be on the horizon in terms of investigations. So instead of having to deal with that extra scrutiny and just red tape, Microsoft and Apple withdrew from those observer seats. And again, this is just based upon, at least my opinion. If you could kind of read through what you see here, is maybe that ever increasing regulatory scrutiny. Um, you know, is this yeah. Is this being looked at maybe as a strategic move from both parties? Yeah, definitely. And I think it's avoid any of those undue accusations of influence over any of that AI development from OpenAI. I always thought it might have been a little strange anyway, to be honest with you, with Microsoft and Apple at the same board table. But anyway, that's sort of the latest in that news of more of the um, inside politics, if you will, in terms of a company.
Yeah, in fact, Jimmy, actually, I thought about this and I thought that there was one more aspect of it, right? So I think it also solves another purpose of it. So imagine if Microsoft already has a board observer seat, and if Apple also gets an observer seat, so you could see potentially the conflict it also creates, right? I mean, so all that partnership discussion that would happen, they will have to then manage it. Okay, the Apple cannot be during those discussions, right? Which is between the, so those kind of thing. I think it also kind of avoid that conflict because, of course, OpenAI is a common theme, but they do have their special partnership in both the cases. Apple would be a little bit reserved in discussing those or letting them discuss those while Microsoft Observer is there, and vice versa. So I think that also avoids a potential conflict there.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Speaking about politics, I don't want to get into a political discussion here, but just I thought interesting if people here, at least in the U.S., were following some key developments. This was back um, actually in October of 2023. The Biden-Harris administration actually announced an executive order around AI, specifically for AI safety. And again, this was that executive order was all about how to manage, or at least think about the risks associated with artificial intelligence. All right. Well, fast forward 6 months, and obviously it's been a little bit more 6 months since that announcement, but the Biden Harris administration actually put out a an action, or at least what's been taking place since that executive order. So it's an interesting read. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but why I mention this is that as we go into this political era that we're going to be getting into for the presidential election, you'll probably hear more from all sides around what it means to each party in terms of obviously everyone's on board in terms of safety and use with these models, but how do different sides look at innovation? I think for me at least it'll be very interesting to see how um, both or all parties kind of put forward their plans for at least the way that they're going to try to regulate and or at least impose governmental rules around innovation and development. The one thing, at least from my perspective, hopefully there's not stifling of innovation because of fear of what it is or what it's not. I think this is where alignment and just overall general safety come definitely into play as it relates to what's next in terms of these models, and where does it go from here.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think it was a good, I would say it was a good initiative by the White House to kind of secure, even though, like, even if it is non-binding commitment, it was a good start. But like sometimes some of the other initiatives could be much more contentious. So, for example, California is considering actually proposal where the provider or the developer of the frontier models, they will be responsible if the models will be used unsafely, right? For example, in the hazardous capacity, or somebody's trying to build a nuclear weapon, etc., using those models, things like that, right? So chemical and biological. So it is something, and the requirement would be to have a kill switch, and it is the developer of those models, not the applications, who will be actually responsible for it as well. So I think it's still under consideration, but it is something that an example of probably trying to like do a like it's like making overkill, right, in terms of the regulation, because that would prevent. Remember, there are a lot of open source, like Meta
Yep.
provides those, right? I mean, imagine the company that is providing open source, not really making money out of that service, but then now they will become responsible for it. So, I think there are some good influencers who have cautioned into it. Like, they say that, okay, it's not the model that you should be regulating; it's the application that you should be regulating, right? So there are many initiatives like that. Some of them could be contentious, but I think it is like everybody's just trying to find the right way. So let's see what happens on that front.
I agree. Yeah, it's finding the right balance. So what else
Yep.
is going on in the world of AI?
Well, by the way, Jamie, the other thing is that you talked about the Olympic, and there's tons of innovation going on in the generative media kind of capability, right? For example, generating the videos, or generating the voice, or avatar, or images, etc. And a lot of those things are going on. We talked about the Microsoft VASA one earlier, where just by a single image and a little bit of the audio clip, you can actually generate the entire video, and that's just so realistic. And they thankfully have not released that in the public yet, and for reason that they are concerned about that it could be misused, and there are people who will misuse. And particularly because it's an election year, it becomes really, really important to actually regulate these things. Everybody's worried about a lot of deep fakes and things like that. So TikTok, for example, they've started actually working on a digital watermarking system, which is basically content credentials. It's called content credentials, to help identify the photos, videos, audio content that is created by the AI, and then it can be identified. So it can be used across. There are some similar systems also available in the market. People are trying to kind of create a consortium, etc., to actually create the content credential system so that they can be identified. I think it's a good step.
Yeah,
Um,
it definitely, especially, and it just kind of ties really well into what we were just talking around. The safety from the political standpoint. But if we're able to identify things like deep fakes through like content creation credentials, or whether it's TikTok or anybody else, I think that goes a long way, because I think the fear in general public as well as politicians is that these tools could be used for harm, especially from a deep fake perspective. So if we're able to identify something, be like, oh yeah, that was generated by I think that would quell a lot of fears that may be out there.
It is, and this technology is something that it may seem like that, okay, it is more rather limited to the consumer world, not in the enterprise world yet. But no, it is going to actually very soon percolate into the enterprise world as well, and we will talk about that. But there are many of the other experiments are happening using these technologies within the enterprises, like custom avatar. Particularly, avatar is a very hot topic for the enterprises. They're trying to actually use it, and even the other things. So the creators want to use some of these technologies as well. In the other news, actually, the Google also did something similar. They created something called Synth ID. So it's like another content credential or digital watermarking system that identifies the AI generated images, right? So they actually launched it last year, and they're trying to have this kind of system where it can be identified that, okay, which is AI generated and which is not. Because to be honest, if somebody shows me an AI generated content, I can't identify that, right? It's so hard. They have become so good at it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree with you. It's things are getting so photorealistic, at least things that I see. It's like you don't know what's real versus not. So like having those identifiers, markers, I think are a good thing.
Yeah.
Speaking of good things, I guess talk about some launches that came about in the recent couple of days. This one is, I would call like pretty much hot off the press. Just what was it? 4 days ago, 5 days ago, OpenAI announced and released their GPT-4o Mini model, and as it sounds, it is what it is. So it's a smaller version of GPT-4o. What's interesting, I haven't seen anything where they define the number of parameters that were in Mini. Yeah, obviously everyone knows the parameters for GPT-4o. Is very high, close to what, almost 2 trillion, I believe, or 1.8 trillion, somewhere around there. Number of parameters. I think GPT-4o Mini is maybe in the range I've heard, through the grapevine. Maybe it's a 10 billion parameter model, which is still large. I mean, whether it's 10 billion or 20 billion or 8 billion, it's still, I call it, it's a small large language model, sort of. Sort of an oxymoron there, but it's a good way of describing it. But what's really exciting, and there's a couple of things that, at least to me, are exciting around GPT-4o Mini, is that the scores that this model has been able to achieve in terms of things like the MMLU is really high. I know I shared it real quick on stage. Let me just bring it back in. But this is a chart from OpenAI, kind of comparing GPT-4o Mini with Gemini Flash, with Claude Haiku, and GPT 3.5 Turbo, as well as then GPT-4o. And if you look at this, the MMLU score, which is, again, just to remind everybody, this is multiple tasks for language understanding. So I think it goes across several different ways of looking at and understanding whether or not a model is at a human level. So the GPT-4, the purple line, 88.7. Obviously, it's a leading model that's out there. But the GPT-4o Mini is 82. And you compare that to something like against what GPT 3.5 Turbo was in terms of 69. This is leaps and bounds above the previous models and is above like what Gemini Flash or Claude Haiku. So, and you want to start thinking about like what scenarios of what usages would you use these models for? So if you're thinking about like Gemini Flash or Claude models for these small language models, this is the sweet spot for where Gemini Mini comes into play. So if it was just that alone in terms of a small model and being able to perform well, definitely the Mini does that. But here's the pieces that are even more interesting, at least to me. Affordability. This GPT-4o Mini is priced at 15 cents per 1 million input tokens. Compare that to GPT-4o, which is $5 per 1 million. This is like fractions of the cost. In some cases, 60% cheaper than than the GPT 3.5 model, and 90% cheaper as compared to GPT-4o. So to me, this is an opportunity, especially for businesses that were like, oh, do we use an OpenAI model? Do we use something from other providers? This now brings in the level of capability at a very cost affordable price. But by the way, output tokens, 60 cents per 1 million, compare that to GPT-4o, which is $15 per 1 million. So again, it's like apples and oranges. So price point is there. The capability of the model is there. But OpenAI didn't stop there. They actually added some additional safety and reliability enhancements. So these are things that OpenAI has been working on. And the GPT-4o Mini is the first model to apply these, what they call instruction hierarchies. So these are methods which improve the model's ability to resist jailbreaks, prompt injections, and system prompt extractions. And these are things, when we talk about developers and people that are developing applications, this goes back to the safety pieces. And this is the first model within OpenAI that's bringing these things to the developers to actually use that. So you've got safety and reliability enhancements. It's cheaper, and it performs way above those other small language models that exist today, and pretty darn close, in my opinion, to where GPT-4o, the Big Brother model, actually runs in.
Yeah, I think it seems like the SLMs who have been actually taking up a lot of news recently, and I think this is probably an attempt towards that, but also trying to make it so much cheaper. It's incredible, actually, almost 90% cheaper than the GPT-4o, and in terms of capabilities, probably not going to be too much different in many of the cases. You, of course, every company has to actually assess. I know customers who have actually, in fact, found the difference between GPT-4o and the GPT-4 as well. In some of the cases, like one of my customers, they actually did that assessment, and they found that GPT-4 has certain a little bit better marginal output in a very particular setting, right? So, GPT-4o and GPT-4o Mini, every customer should actually do that kind of testing to see if it really works for them. But I think for the daily purpose, GPT-4o should be good enough. I can't believe that we have come such a long way, right? GPT 3.5, which really changed the world, now seems so much outdated, now seems so primitive, right?
Yeah.
It's just incredible.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I know as we go through this today's episode, I'll come back and I'll do a short little comparison, comparing the GPT-4 Mini to GPT-4o. To me, seeing is believing. So a little bit later, I'll jump back to that. But I do want to stay on this notion of like models. I have up here the Gemini Flash. Again, depending upon how closely you've been following these things, there was a recent update to this Google model, which was the Gemini 1.5 Flash. That it basically just brought addition savings. Everyone is looking to drop costs as well as then increase speed and performance, and that's really one of the major developments within the 1.5 Flash. And it's also the tool that's being used and integrated with other Google products like Gmail and Google Docs. The one thing certainly that I would say this Gemini model, even the Flash, is the context window. I mean, they still have the largest context window out there with 1 million. And you compare that to the GPT-4 Mini, which is 128,000 tokens. So again, this is where I would say certainly go out there and look at models and determine what's going to be best for your fit. But I think going back to the GPT-4 Mini, this adds a new class of model with great scale, but at a really good price. Um,
Yeah.
and so I know that there's been a couple of other new models. Do you want to jump in, Shadab, on some of the things that you've heard and seen?
Yeah, like there are so many new models that are always coming around. Nvidia and Mistral, actually, they unveiled a model called Nemo, right? It's a 12 billion parameter model. It's a You can use it to actually develop and deploy the chatbots. So I don't know if there is something like really spectacular about it. I think it's just another collaboration between them, and they've launched it. Did they play on the price point? I think it's just cheaper than some of the others ones. But here's the thing, right? I mean, if you look at it, like there are tons of these things, right? Probably a few thousand models already out there, right? I know in the Azure itself, we have like, and I'm talking about the variants as well, not just the at the family level, but there are literally thousands of actually variants, and the models are out there. Is there a market for each of them? It's a little bit hard to say, because if you look at it, every enterprise and every consumer can actually use them, and every enterprise is a target customer for these models. So if you look at it, the entire world is a target. So from that point of view, I think there is still a market. I don't know if the market is still saturated or not. Probably not. I think there is still a market. It is becoming more commodity now, but you know I believe everybody will find a little bit of the space for them. Although the consolidation is probably on the card as well, because I think it's not about the models; it's about the operations and running them. And there is so much hidden cost that the consolidation and investments have become priority. And we have seen that, right? A lot of companies like Adapt has recently been taken up by the Amazon. Inflection was taken up by Microsoft. The companies who are looking to consolidate now. So we'll see about that. But in another news about from the OpenAI, it's very interesting. Last week we actually did an episode on the AI agent with Simon JB, and there was a great example that Simon actually showed, where you have an application which uses the DALI for generating the images, and then there is another agent which will critique it, right? And then there will be an iterative process. You have given certain instructions to the agent, and then it will continue to critique it until it reaches a really good output, right? Something which is acceptable. So something similar that actually OpenAI is also doing with something called Critic GPT. There's another new model that actually they are using it. What they're doing is Critic GPT, as the name suggests, what it does is it actually tries to identify the problems in the code generated by the GPT-4. So, or sorry, Chat GPT. So, it's like it's an assistant tool or assistant model, you can say, that is used by the AI trainers in the RLHF, right? The reinforcement learning with the human feedback. So if the AI trainer, the literally the people whose job is to identify the wrong or the right output and flag it, they actually their feedback is so important and increasing
So,
the accuracy of these models.
is Critic GPT a new model, or is it like a GPT's that's been constructed with certain instructions? It sounds like the way you're kind of
It's a fine-tuned model of it. It's a fine-tuned variation of the GPT-4, actually. So it just they've trained it particularly effectively. They have given it like bunch of like errors in the code and trained it that way. So now it has become good at criticizing. Uh, really, right? But it's a great thing, right? I mean, I was thinking about it, Jamie, that it is such a good thing that you can actually use this kind of model or agentic system anywhere,
yeah.
anything, right? Whether it's a writing, whether it's a image generation or anything, you don't have to necessarily test it. Actually, enterprises can also develop this kind of model where
Yeah.
they can have an assistant which will check everything, right? From it could be from a safety point of view. You can also have it like in safety GPT, for example, right? Which will assess everything. It like the possibilities are limitless when you think about this kind of an assistant model system.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I've been working with a couple enterprise customers that have at least started to think about how to use a large language model. I'm going to call it police, but basically refine output that's coming out. So, this is along that same line. So, definitely an architectural pattern that I think not only is starting to be used today, but I just think it will grow. And if like companies or firms like OpenAI is creating a customized model like this Critic GPT, I think that's great, and it'll help with the proliferation of that architectural design.
Yeah, and bunch of other things that has happened. Just I just want to briefly and rapidly actually go through them. We talked about this text to video, text to audio, these kind of like system that so many out there. Luma Labs actually they released something pretty good, the Dream Machine, where you can actually give these kind of prompts. I played with it. I think it's pretty good. Of course there are many improvements still to be made, but it's pretty good. You can also actually incrementally develop these things. So you generate certain video, right? And let's say you can give, for example, a video saying that okay, person is drinking coffee, and then you can it generates a short segment of that video, and then you can actually extend it, saying that now let's make that person get up, put the coffee mug down, and walk somewhere, right? So a series of incremental videos that you can generate, and then you can actually put them together, and that becomes a movie, right? In fact, that is exactly what Toys R Us has done actually. So Toys R Us actually released a movie which was like the origin of Toys R Us, and it was using Sora. Remember that OpenAI's system, and that movie is actually pretty good. It shows their, I think, what is the founder of that Toys R Us, I'm forgetting the name. I think George Lazarus, I believe. Um, and it shows his childhood dream, how he actually imagines a toy world, and that giraffe, which was the emblem of the Toys R Us. So it is pretty good, right? I mean, and I was thinking about it. Hey, here's this really good use case of how these media generating models can find their way into the enterprises as well. So pretty amazing, actually, stuff. And something similar also, Jamie, like Stability AI, they also released a Stable Diffusion 3 medium, which is based on 2 billion parameters. So non-commercial use. I think this is very interesting, right? I mean, a lot of these models are kind of making a calculated, measured step, because there's so much potential of safety violations, that like many of them are non-commercial. They are like taking incremental steps, and particularly in this year, it is very sensitive. So let's see what will happen. But it is pretty good, actually. I played with some of those things. Maybe we will do one episode showing all these different kind of things and some examples, and what can you do with it. You can actually upload your picture and ask it to kind of put that into the video as well. Things like that. Lot of things are actually happening in this world as well.
That sounds good. And along those lines, I know Meta was just announcing or just releasing a new AI model called Jasco, which is actually a joint audio and symbolic conditioning. So, and what that really is, again, that's by the way the acronym for Jasco, but it's a text to music generation. So. The idea here is it could take different audio inputs, such as a chord or a beat, and then use that to improve upon or create, a final AI generated sound. So there were a couple of researchers that are looking at this Jasco, and the notion is that allows users to adjust the different features of these different generated sounds, and to kind of hone that into a final sound that they want. What's also interesting too with this is that they're also, or at least Meta's looking at Audio Seal, which adds watermarks to enter AI generated speech. So again, it's to determine what's real versus not. Kind of goes back to my deepfake comments that I made before. So you're seeing these kind of repeatable focus on how do we not only create content through AI, but then how do we ensure that we know what is AI generated content. So that's certainly important.
Perfect. Yep. Okay. But Jimmy, I think the highlight of this week was really the GPT-4o Mini, and you promised that you will show something in action. So I'm eager to see that.
Yeah, let me show a couple things real quick. I'll just run through a few prompts. Let me bring my screen back in, and then I'll rip through a couple of these. So let me just explain real quick what you are looking at. So as you were talking about before, with OpenAI, one of the great, at least I believe, one of the great capabilities that they have through OpenAI's playground is the ability to compare models, and it's not just about like, hey, what does Model One, have in it versus Model Two. You could actually test out prompts side by side, and not only can you see the output, but you'll also be able to see the latency, like how quick is a model able to respond, as well as number of tokens. Now you got to remember that why are tokens important? Well, you get charged based upon tokens, but these models are, they generate different responses each time. So you want to see, well, is one going to be more chatty or not than the other, especially if you ask it not to. So again, I'm directly in OpenAI's playground, their platform.openai.com. Go to the playground, and then when you do that, you can actually do this compared to models. So I've already brought it up. By the way, what I'm showing here, you do need to be a paid user of OpenAI. So I have a small little account with them that I test things out. So I've got GPT-4o on the left and GPT-4o Mini on the right. By the way, you could pick whatever model. If I wanted to try this against GPT 3.5, I could. So I'm in this playground compare, you could tell it to sync your system messages and your prompts, and that's exactly what I have. So I have a few different prompts that I've already created. I'm going to do a couple of different things because there's many different types of ways that we want to work with these models. So one of them is, just give me a technical explanation. In this case, I'm going to ask it to explain the concept of tornado genesis in simple terms for a high school student, right? So again, pretty straightforward. So I'm going to run this, and if you notice, both of these tools or both of these models get the answer, or sorry, get the question at the same time. So I could see here that GPT-4o answered this a lot quicker. It looks like maybe 2/3 or a third quicker. It's 4,300 milliseconds. This answered it in 701 tokens. GPT-4 Mini took a little bit longer, but answered it in almost double amount of tokens. And I could look through and see how well is this actually formed. So, and in this one, there's no right or wrong answer, right? It's what is it actually generating? I mean, there could be a wrong answer, but I'm reading this: warm air meets cold air, typically form thunderstorms in the Gulf, blah blah blah. Is that right? Yeah, it's got the same kind of concept, but the GPT-4 Mini didn't go into as much detail as it looks like here. Um, so the answers look pretty good. I would probably say both did a good job at answering. Let's take another one. This one might be of interest. I'm going to clear out the chat here. Let me take another one. This one's going to be a problem solving prompt. So in this case, a farmer has a wolf, a goat, and a cabbage. He needs to cross a river with all three, but can only take one at a time. If left together, the wolf will eat the goat and the goat will eat the cabbage. How does the farmer get everything across safely? So let me run this. So this should be one where, all right, the answer to this is you got to take the wolf over. So sorry, you got to take the goat over so the wolf won't eat the cabbage, and then you're gonna take over the wolf next time around. But then so here's, let me see if they got it correct. So the farmer takes the goat across, leaves it on the other side, comes back, then takes the wolf across. But when he goes back, it comes back with the goat, then take the cabbage across, and then go to the other side. Finally takes the right. So GPT-4o got this right. It did it in 799 tokens, and did it in 3,557 milliseconds. So GPT-4 Mini, let's see if it got it right. Takes the goat across first and leave it on there. So I go back, take the cabbage across. So GPT-4 Mini got this wrong. Because if they took the goat and then took the cabbage, all right, well, it's saying they would take the goat next time across. No, it got it right.
I think that's right, yeah.
It just did it in a little wonky of an order. But yeah, that's good. So it looked like they both generated, the right answer. I would say maybe the GPT-4o was a little bit better in the way it explained it. But again, more tokens coming out on this side. So there's probably more background processing and things that are actually happening.
Yeah, that's surprising, Jimmy. Why there's so much huge difference between the number of tokens that it is showing processed? The output is about same, so it's not the output tokens.
Yeah, there must be something, again, the way that it's kind of thinking about its process. By the way, I think the tokens might be cumulative. This is going. Let me grab one more, or maybe two. So this one's probably been out. You probably have seen something like this for every model. Models are not good at counting, especially word problems, and we're trying to, quote unquote, trick it. So, in this case, I ate 4 apples and 1 orange yesterday. Theoretically, that means nothing, right? Because I start out today, I woke up and I counted 2 apples and 2 oranges. For lunch today, I had 1 apple. How many apples and oranges do I have left? So let's see if they, both come up with the right answer. And two apples, one. So I have one apple and two oranges left. Yep. So GPT-4 got that right, as well as GPT-4o Mini. So yeah, they look like they both did pretty good on this word problem. Again, this token thing looks a little suspect, so maybe I won't um, go exactly based upon what the Chat GPT compare piece looks. But again, I'm looking at the times. GPT-4o seems to definitely be, at least in each one of these tests, a little bit better than GPT-4o Mini. So not bad so far. So again, these are both providing decent answers, and didn't get tripped up yet. I've got one more. This is a image. So let me bring in the last prompt. I wanted to see how well it does at recognizing images and what it could build off of that. So I'm going to tell it, tell me about the image. What city is this? Where do you believe this picture was taken from in terms of what location? So let me upload an image. I happen to have a image of New York City skyline, which is taken from the New Jersey point of view. So it's basically looking across the river at New York City. So let's see if both models, understand, number one, what city this was, and two, um, what that perception was. So yeah, Lower Manhattan, it picked up that's One World Trade Center, commonly known as the Freedom Tower. Um, Picture was taken across from the Hudson River. So GPT-4 got that right, or 4o got that right. Tall building. So many didn't say it's the Freedom Tower. So GPT-4o seems to be a little bit more understanding of maybe of things. Um, and said, yeah, it was from across the way from New Jersey. So again, slightly better answer from GPT-4o in terms of visual input, but Mini did a pretty good job as well. One thing that I did not mention before when I talked about the Mini model, when you look at OpenAI's press release, they mention today GPT-4 Mini, accepts input as text or photo, but they also indicated it'll be able to have video as input. But more striking, and I think this is the part a lot of people missed, was that they said in future GPT-4o will generate imaging and video. So it kind of makes me wonder: is this going to be the first integration with Sora, and is that going to be part of the model? So it would be interesting to see over the next couple of months or whatever it is when they provide that next update for GPT-4o Mini, if it'll have those more advanced output modalities other than just images and text.
It's getting there, Jamie.
Yeah.
Well, this is a great demo. Yeah, a great comparison. Looks like they're pretty competitive in terms of the output outcome. I think, of course, everybody has to test for their own purpose, but I think pretty
Yeah.
competitive.
And I go back to, think about what your use case is. Like you said, test it out. But I would surmise that in a lot of capabilities or applications, the Mini will be just fine. And this has a profound impact because as companies, organizations, developers start to think about what do I build against what model, the level of like we talk about capability, but it's cheapness, cheapness as it relates to its understanding of language. I think is going to be a game changer. So we'll
Yeah.
see where this goes.
One interesting tidbit is that GPT or the OpenAI rather have had models which are like, for example, they have done they have the models like GPT 3.5, GPT 3 or before, and then GPT 4. And then they also released something called turbo models, right? Turbo models were really focused on the speed, actually, right? So, as the name suggests. And then, um, and then it was also like for example they had like for a brief time they also had models like instruct models, right, which were really good in taking the command. So they were like fine tuned for taking the instructions particularly. I don't know what will happen now going forward because Mini is a completely new variation, right?
Yeah.
They did not have a Mini before. So what does that mean? Does it take away the instruct? Will there be instruct? We don't know. Probably not because looks like every model is pretty good at the instructions. Will they have a turbo as well? GPT-4o turbo? We don't know that. Will they still have a four like Omni model separately? Looks like probably not because, as you said, right, these things will get kind of integrated into it, and every model will be an Omni model. But it's interesting to see. But it looks like there is some sort of a divergence from the naming system and the kind of variation they have been coming about. Mini seems like probably is gonna stay in the future as a separate variation.
Yeah, I would agree. You never know how companies are going to change the name of these things, but
That
it
is
seems
true.
like that's the path.
Yep, perfect. I think that's about it. Jamie, anything else that we have for the week? Otherwise, I think it was a pretty good condensed and tons of stuff. And we still had to leave out some of the things that were not so relevant to the people, but there are just so many other things also that happen.
Yeah, no, I think, like you said, we covered a lot, and there's so much more even to dive into. So, if you've made it this far into today's episode, thank you for watching, for listening, and on to the next one.
Yeah. Look forward to the next one. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah.